Tate was the definition of a faithful companion. He was the Webster's dictionary entry for loyalty and devotion, living, breathing proof of constancy. And all he expected from me was simple: to be emotionally present and to know my place at night, which was always in his bed. Anywhere else wasn't allowed. The moment I even thought of sleeping somewhere else, he would shut it down immediately, firm but gentle, insistently guiding me upstairs until I lay beside him. It wasn't about control, it was about claiming the physical and emotional space we had built together, the sacred world he had created just for us. With Tate, nothing was casual. Everything, every laugh, every touch, every quiet presence was deliberate, exclusive, and sacred. And I was at the center of it, always. Every night Tate tucked me in. He made sure the blankets were just right, warm as if by an electric blanket, perfectly cocooning me in heat and safety. Then before climbing in, he pressed a soft kiss to the tip of my nose, his lips lingering just a moment, grounding me, reminding me I was his. Once I was settled, he climbed in behind me, wrapping himself around my back in a spooning embrace. His arms held me close, not too tight but possessively enough that I could feel his heartbeat echoing against mine. It was a rhythm that whispered safety, devotion, and worship all at once. "I'm here," he'd murmur, voice low and steady, like it was a promise he repeated every night. And for those hours, as I drifted off with his warmth pressed against me, I felt what it meant to be completely claimed, not as a lover but as the singular focus of someone's fiery, obsessive, and protective devotion. Tate's love wrapped around me, constant, unyielding, tender, and entirely his own. Tate turned toward me in bed, the moonlight spilling across his face. For a moment he was silent, staring at the blanket between us, then he let out a slow sigh. "I'm sorry that I hurt you," he said quietly. I blinked at him. "What?" At the table, his voice was heavy with regret. "When I grabbed your hand and squeezed it, I'm sorry if I hurt your fingers." Tate looked genuinely remorseful. It was rare to see him like this. Usually he carried himself with confidence, but now there was only guilt in his eyes. "I promised I'd never hurt you," he continued. "And I did. It wasn't right." I remained quiet, letting him speak. "Wayne was a boy I knew years ago," Tate said. "He was trouble." Tate's jaw tightened. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. "I shouldn't have hurt your hand," Tate said again, looking down. "I just wanted you to stop talking before Joey made light of something that's still painful." A faint, frustrated smile crossed his face. "Joey can be a bit of a tease sometimes." I studied him in the darkness. For all of Tate's strength and confidence, there were moments like this when I could see the old hurt beneath the surface. Tate shifted closer and rested his head against the pillow. "I never wanted you caught in the middle of it," he murmured, "and I never wanted to be the reason you got hurt." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension that had lingered since dinner seemed to fade away, replaced by the quiet comfort of simply being together. "I'm sorry, Noah," Tate whispered one last time. This time there was no anger in his voice, only regret. "Why is Wayne a sensitive subject for you?" I asked softly. Tate's expression darkened for a moment. He looked away, staring at the ceiling. "It's not important, it's not my secret to tell," he said. He reached for my left hand and gently turned it over in his own. His thumb brushed across the faint red mark on the top of my hand where he'd squeezed it earlier. Tate's face tingled with guilt. Slowly he lifted my hand and pressed it to his lips, placing a soft kiss against my skin. "I hope that makes you feel better," he said quietly. "I promise I'll never do that again." He sighed and lowered our hands onto the blanket. "It's just, when some of my family members think something is funny, they tease me relentlessly. I didn't want that to happen." A reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. We never talked about Wayne again, not that day, not the next, not in the years that followed. Through the rest of our teens into our 20s it stayed buried. But I never stopped thinking about it, about Wayne, about the way the entire table had gone silent, about the way Tate had looked at me like I'd crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I wanted to ask. God, I wanted to ask for more details. Anyone, Talia, his father, even Joey. But I didn't because I was afraid that if I pushed too far, if I asked the wrong question to the wrong person, something would slip. Something I wasn't supposed to know, and Tate would find out. And if that happened, I might lose him. Tate might stop talking to me, might stop letting me into his house, might shut me out completely. So I stayed quiet, even when it ate at me, even when the question never really went away. Because whatever Wayne was, it wasn't worth losing Tate over. Tate didn't pull away from Noah either. He spends the night curled around Noah's body, sleeping intently, stealing as much body heat as possible. I thought about other sleepovers besides Wayne. Tate had been invited as a guest. The second time, at 13, he stayed the night, but only after he took me along for the ride home the next morning. Sleepovers with other people, he said quietly, are boring and tedious. That's what matters, we stick to us. From that moment on, we lived by one rule: whatever emotional intimacy or physical presence we shared with each other, we never gave to anyone else. Not a shred, not a glance, not a laugh, not a touch. What we had belonged to us alone. Tate Blue never apologized to anyone. Not in the way people expected. Not in the way that required lowering his voice or admitting fault out loud. He came from a world where mistakes were rerouted, not owned, where money softened consequences and silence ended arguments before they could grow teeth. But with me, it was different. With me, Tate didn't stay untouchable. It never started as something either of us named. It showed up quietly in the aftermath of small collisions, words said too fast, assumptions made in anger, misunderstandings that should have faded but instead lingered between us like weather that refused to clear. The first time he apologized, it didn't even sound like an apology. He stood in the doorway of my room, still tense from whatever argument we'd had earlier, jaw set like he was bracing for impact. I expected him to leave again the way he usually did, angry, unchanged, untouchable in the way rich people sometimes were when they were used to never being corrected. Instead, he held out a small box. "I saw this," he said, as the words cost him more than he wanted to admit. "You mentioned it once." Inside was something I'd only spoken about in passing, something I hadn't even thought he was listening to. That was the thing about Tate. He listened more than he spoke, and he remembered more than he ever admitted. "I'm not saying I was wrong," he added quickly, as if the admission itself needed protection. Then, after a pause that felt like it took effort, "But I don't want you upset." That was it. That was the closest he came to an apology at first. Not surrender, not confession, just a correction aimed at restoring me. Over time, I learned the pattern. When Tate was with anyone else in the world, business, family, expectations, he could be immovable. If he made a decision, it stayed made. If he believed he was right, the conversation ended there. But with me, something loosened. I was the only exception. He didn't defend himself against me indefinitely. The only person whose disappointment didn't just bounce off him and disappear. It wasn't that he apologized easily. It was that he didn't leave things broken between us for long. Sometimes it was words. "I shouldn't have said that." Short, uneven, like it wasn't a language he practiced often. Sometimes it was presence, him showing up when he didn't have to, standing in my space like proximity itself was the correction. And sometimes it was gifts, not as currency but as translation. If he couldn't fully articulate regret, he'd try to undo it in another form, something thoughtful, something precise, something that proved he'd been paying attention even when he pretended not to be. People around him never saw that version. They saw the version of Tate Blue who didn't bend. But I saw the other one, the one who didn't like being wrong but liked the idea of losing me even less. That was the difference. Still, even in the closeness of it, there was an imbalance neither of us fully named. Because being the only person someone apologizes to can feel important at first. Like significance, like proof that you matter more than anyone else in the room. But over time, it also becomes a kind of weight. If I were the only place Tate learned to repair himself, then I was also the only place where everything fragile between him and the world eventually landed. And Tate, rich, stubborn, unyielding Tate, never asked me to carry that. He just assumed I would stay. Rich boys like Tate didn't apologize. That was the rule everyone around him seemed to understand without ever saying it out loud. In his world, words were permanent only when they were convenient. Otherwise, they could be redirected, reinterpreted, or simply left to fade until no one dared bring them up again. If Tate said something sharp, people adjusted themselves around it. If he withdrew, people filled the silence for him. If he dismissed a situation, it stopped being a situation at all. Not because he was cruel, but because he had never been required to be anything else. Except with me. With me, something in him shifted in a way that didn't match the version of him other people knew how to navigate. He didn't hold his ground the same way. He didn't let silence do all the work. He didn't assume distance would fix what closeness had complicated. It started in small, almost unnoticeable reversals. A comment he'd made too quickly, cutting, careless, half-dismissive would hang in the air between us for only a moment before I went quiet, not dramatic silence, just enough for him to notice the absence of ease. And he always noticed. Tate Blue didn't explain himself to anyone. That was the reputation that followed him like a shadow, clean, untouchable, final in his decisions. But when I looked at him like I didn't understand him, or worse, like I didn't recognize him in what he'd just said, something in that certainty would fracture. He would stop mid-motion. Not because he was asked to, not because anyone forced him, but because the version of himself he could carry through the world didn't fit in the space between us. "You took that wrong," he would say first, immediate, defensive but not distant. And then, when I didn't answer fast enough, he would try again, softer, more careful, like he was translating himself into a language I wouldn't leave him for. "I didn't mean it like that." That was the closest he came to undoing himself. People outside of this never saw it. They didn't see him revise his words in real time. They didn't see him abandon pride mid-sentence just to make sure I was still there, still looking at him like he hadn't become someone unfamiliar. Because Tate didn't move through the world asking for permission. But he did somehow with me. Not in a way he would have admitted, not in any formal sense. He would have denied it if I named it directly. But it showed in the pattern, the way he paused before decisions when I was near, the way his certainty softened into consideration, the way he checked my expression like it was part of the outcome he cared about. If something I heard from him made me go still, just slightly, just enough for him to notice, he changed course immediately. Not later, not after reflection, immediately. "I'll fix it," he would say, like the problem was already identified and already his responsibility. Sometimes it meant explaining himself again, slower this time, as if repetition could undo impact. Sometimes it meant retracting what he said entirely, as if the original sentence had never existed. And sometimes it meant something more complicated, him standing there, visibly frustrated with himself, because he didn't like that he'd caused a reaction he couldn't control. It wasn't that he lacked pride. It was that pride that didn't hold up when I stopped feeling okay in the space he created. That was the part no one else understood. Tate could walk through rooms where people challenged him and nothing would shift. But if I went quiet, he looked for the reason as it mattered more than being right ever did. And over time, that became its own kind of pattern between us, not ownership, not control, not hierarchy, but a strange, constant recalibration where he measured his words against my reaction before they were even finished leaving his mouth. As if my understanding wasn't just something he wanted. It was something he refused to lose. Tate explained the dynamics between Tate and his extended family while Noah listened, lying in bed next to Tate. "Joey is a massive tease. He likes to poke fun at me sometimes. Most of the time he means well, but this was one of those things I didn't want to be teased about." Tate shifted closer and wrapped an arm around me, pulling me against his chest. His embrace was warm and protective. "Please forgive me," he murmured. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. I could hear the sincerity in his voice. "You can ask me anything at any time," Tate said. "Just don't talk about my personal business in front of adults. It gets weird." He groaned and shook his head. "The last thing I need is my father wondering what kind of chaos I'm creating." Despite himself, he laughed quietly. Then he tightened his arm around me and rested his chin on top of my head. "I never want you thinking I was angry at you," he said softly. "I wasn't, I was just embarrassed." The room fell silent. For the first time since dinner, the tension seemed to disappear, replaced by the familiar comfort of being together. "Are we still Noah and Tate?" he asked. I smiled. "Always." Tate never seemed to care about consequences. Rules existed for everyone else, but not for Tate Blue. If he decided he didn't want to sit through another hour of arithmetic, he would simply stand up, grab his backpack, and walk out of the classroom. Teachers shouted his name, principals threatened detention, notes were sent home, none of it mattered. One afternoon in elementary school, Tate leaned back in his chair and glanced at Noah. "Want a hamburger?" he asked casually. Noah blinked. "We're in class." "So?" The answer was so perfectly Tate that Noah couldn't help laughing. 10 minutes later, the boys were halfway down the sidewalk, leaving school behind them as they headed toward McDonald's. The teacher hadn't given permission. Neither boy had signed out. They had simply left because Tate had decided he wanted fries and a milkshake. That was how Tate lived. Authority meant very little to him. Teachers were ignored, principals were tolerated, parents were listened to only when Tate felt like listening. Consequences never seemed real in his mind. Detention, grounding, lectures, punishment, none of it carried enough weight to stop him from doing whatever he had already decided he wanted to do. Most children worry about getting in trouble. Tate worried about getting what he wanted. If he wanted to skip class, he skipped class. If he wanted to spend the day riding bikes instead of attending school, he did. If he wanted to disappear for hours exploring the hills outside town, nobody could stop him. There was a wild freedom to him that both fascinated and frustrated everyone around him. Adults called him stubborn, some called him reckless, others called him impossible. Noah simply called him Tate. Because beneath the defiance and impulsiveness was a boy who followed his own internal compass with absolute certainty. Whether that compass pointed him in the right direction was another question entirely, but once Tate made up his mind, the world itself seemed incapable of changing it. Tate Blue had an ideal life. He was born into a life that most people could only dream about. Tate always acted as though he had already committed the worst crime imaginable and somehow escaped punishment for it. That was the only way I could ever explain his attitude toward rules. To Tate, sneaking out of elementary school to get McDonald's wasn't rebellion, it wasn't even misconduct. In his mind, it barely registered as a rule violation at all. One afternoon, after we'd casually walked out of class and spent an hour eating hamburgers and fries before returning as if nothing had happened, I finally asked him the question that had been bothering me for years. Why do you always act like you're above the rules? Tate looked at me as if I had asked why the sky was blue. If you have money, he said with a shrug, you make the rules. If you can't make the rules, you pay people so you can break them without consequences. Then he took another bite of his cheeseburger and changed the subject. That was Tate. He genuinely believed the world operated differently than people pretended it did. Adults spent all day talking about fairness, responsibility, and consequences, but Tate viewed most of those speeches as theater. He thought authority figures were hypocrites who enforced rules they didn't follow themselves. He believed many of them cared more about control than morality. As a child, he had already reached conclusions about the world that most people didn't arrive at until adulthood. Teachers would tell him to stay in his seat. He would smirk. Principals would threaten detention. He would smirk. Parents would lecture him about responsibility. He would smirk. It wasn't a cruel smirk, it wasn't even particularly disrespectful. It was almost worse than that. It was the expression of someone who found the entire performance amusing. The smirk drove adults crazy. A teacher could spend 20 minutes explaining why a rule existed, only to look up and see Tate sitting there with that tiny grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. What is so funny, Mr. Blue? Nothing. And everything. Because Tate wasn't listening to the words, he was studying the person speaking them, he was judging whether they actually believed what they were saying. Most authority figures failed that test. In Tate's eyes, they demanded obedience because they enjoyed being obeyed. They claimed wisdom while making foolish decisions. They expected respect while offering very little in return. As far as Tate was concerned, authority wasn't something automatically earned by age, title, or position. It had to be deserved. And very few people deserved it. That philosophy followed him everywhere. If he wanted to skip school, he skipped school. If he wanted to leave class, he left class. If he wanted to spend the afternoon riding bicycles, swimming, or wandering around town, then that was what he did. The remarkable thing was that his defiance was rarely malicious. Tate wasn't interested in hurting people. He wasn't interested in bullying anyone. He wasn't destructive for the sake of destruction. Most of the time, he simply wanted freedom. Freedom to go where he wanted. Freedom to decide his own schedule. Freedom to live according to his own instincts rather than someone else's expectations. And wherever Tate went, I usually went too. Not because he forced me. Because following Tate was like following a force of nature. He moved through life with such certainty that it was difficult not to be swept along with him. Yet there was one exception. One person who could stop him. One person who could make that smirk disappear. Joey. I noticed it when we were young. A teacher could yell at Tate and get nowhere. A principal could threaten suspension and accomplish nothing. His parents could ground him and he would barely react. But Joey only had to say a few words. Tate, don't. That was it. No yelling. No threats. No punishment. Just those 2 words. And something changed. The smirk vanished. His shoulders lowered. His eyes dropped toward the floor. For a moment, he looked less like the fearless boy who challenged everyone and more like a child who suddenly remembered there were limits after all. Go upstairs. Tate would hesitate. Then he'd quietly turn around and walk upstairs. No argument. No sarcastic remarks. No defiance. No smirk. Just obedience. It shocked people who witnessed it. The same boy who laughed at principals and ignored teachers would listen to Joey immediately. Not because he feared punishment. Tate never feared punishment. He feared disappointing Joey. That was different. Joey was one of the few adults Tate genuinely respected, one of the few people he believed was honest, one of the few authority figures he didn't view as a hypocrite. And because that respect was real, Joey possessed something nobody else had. Influence. The strange thing about Tate was that he wasn't incapable of following rules. He followed Joey's. He simply refused to follow rules created by people he didn't respect. To everyone else, that made him impossible. To Tate, it made perfect sense. When Tate was little, long before he became the stubborn, fearless boy who challenged every teacher, principal, and authority figure that crossed his path, there was exactly one person whose disappointment could reduce him to tears in an instant. That person was Uncle Joey. It could start with something small. Maybe Tate had gotten into trouble at school for refusing to listen to his teacher. Maybe he had talked back to his parents. Maybe he had ignored instructions and wandered somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. Whatever the offense happened to be, the result was usually the same. His parents would sit him down in the living room. Tate, what you did was unacceptable. Tate would sit with his arms folded. His mother would explain why his behavior was wrong. Tate would stare at the wall. His father would lecture him about responsibility. Tate would roll his eyes. Sometimes he would stick his tongue out. Sometimes he would slump dramatically across the couch cushions as if listening to adults was the greatest burden any child had ever endured. Other times he would simply sit there with a look of complete indifference, making it clear he wasn't taking any of the lecture seriously. The more frustrated his parents became, the less concerned Tate appeared. It was as though consequences existed in a world completely separate from the one he lived in. Nothing seemed capable of reaching him. Then Joey would walk into the room. Everything changed. The shift was so immediate it almost seemed impossible. One moment Tate would be pouting, sulking, or acting stubborn. The next moment his attention would snap entirely toward Joey. Joey didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten punishment. He didn't need long speeches. Usually he would just stand there quietly, listening while Tate's parents explained what had happened. The room would fall silent. Tate would watch him carefully. Waiting. Joey would look down at him. Tate. The little boy's shoulders would tense. What happened today wasn't acceptable. Suddenly, the defiance would begin to disappear. The attitude. The stubbornness. The smirk. All of it. Joey would kneel down so they were eye level. Then he would say the words Tate hated hearing more than anything else. I'm disappointed in you. Those words broke through every wall Tate had. His lower lip would immediately begin to tremble. His eyes would fill with tears. The brave, stubborn little boy who had spent the last 20 minutes ignoring everyone else would crumble almost instantly. No, Tate would whisper. The tears would start rolling down his cheeks. No, Uncle Joey. Before anyone could say another word, Tate would hurry across the room and throw his tiny arms around Joey's leg as tightly as he could. I'm sorry, he'd cry. His voice would become small and shaky. The voice of a little boy rather than the fearless rebel he tried so hard to be. I'm sorry, Uncle Joey. More tears. I didn't mean to. Joey would place a hand gently on top of Tate's head while the child clung to him. Tate. I'm sorry. I know. I'm really sorry. I know you are. The crying would only intensify. Because what upset Tate wasn't the punishment. It wasn't losing privileges. It wasn't being sent to his room. It wasn't getting in trouble. It was knowing he had disappointed Joey. For reasons nobody could fully explain, that mattered more to him than anything else. Joey would eventually bend down and scoop the sobbing child into his arms. Tate would immediately bury his face against Joey's shoulder. His little hands would clutch the fabric of Joey's shirt. Joey would patiently let him cry. When the tears finally began to slow, Joey would pull back slightly and brush a thumb across Tate's wet cheeks. Every child makes mistakes. Tate sniffled. Even me. Especially you. A tiny laugh would escape through the tears. Joey smiled. But making mistakes doesn't mean there aren't consequences. Tate lowered his eyes. He already knew what was coming. You still have to take responsibility for what you did. A small nod. You understand? Yes, Uncle Joey. And are you going to do it again? Tate shook his head vigorously. No. No what? No, Uncle Joey. Joey kissed his forehead. Good. Then he would kiss one tear-stained cheek. And then the other. The tears would gradually stop. The storm would pass. The little boy would settle down, exhausted from crying. Joey would stand, keeping Tate securely in his arms. Come on. Tate would immediately wrap his arms around Joey's neck. Where are we going? Upstairs. The answer made Tate sigh. Because he knew exactly what that meant. Time out. Consequences. Time to sit and think about what had happened. Even so, he didn't argue. Not with Joey. Joey carried him up the staircase while Tate rested his head against his shoulder. Every few steps, Tate would tighten his grip slightly, as though making sure Joey wasn't still upset with him. Joey would simply rub circles on his back. When they reached Tate's bedroom, Joey would set him gently on the bed. The child looked much smaller now than he had downstairs. No attitude. No defiance. Just a little boy who had made a mistake. Joey knelt in front of him one last time. I love you. Tate nodded. I love you too. That doesn't change because you got in trouble. Another nod. But you still need to sit here and think about what happened. Okay. Joey kissed the top of his head. Then he stood and headed toward the door. For a moment Tate watched him leave. Then just before Joey stepped out into the hallway, a tiny voice called after him. Uncle Joey. Joey looked back. Yes. Tate wiped his eyes. I'm really sorry. A smile touched Joey's face. I know, buddies. And somehow, hearing those words made the timeout a little easier to bear. Long before he was born, his future had already been mapped out for him. The Blue family was the wealthiest and most respected family in Southern California, with a fortune that had been built over generations and centuries of good fortune and financial prosperity. Their name carried influence in business, politics, and high society circles. People recognized the Blue name immediately, and with that recognition came power, prestige, and expectations. Tate's grandfather had been the patriarch of the family for decades. He was a man whose decisions shaped not only the future of the Blue family, but also the lives of hundreds of employees who worked for the family business. Though he had passed away a year before Tate and I met in preschool, his influence remained everywhere. Family members still spoke of him with respect, and many of the traditions he established continued long after his death. The line of succession within the family had always been clear. Terrence Blue, Tate's father, was the eldest son. Because of that, he inherited control of much of the family's business interests and financial assets. Terrence's younger brothers, Tim and Joey, had successful lives of their own, but neither had children. Tim never became a father and Joey never had children either. That left Tate. As the only son of the eldest son, Tate occupied a unique position within the family. From the day he was born, everyone understood that one day he would inherit not only a fortune but also the responsibility of leading the family legacy. His future was practically guaranteed. Trust funds had been established before he was old enough to understand what money was. Investments grew in his name. Property, stocks, and business interests were carefully managed with the expectation that one day they would belong to him. When Terence eventually inherited the remaining portions of the family fortune, plans were already in place for how Tate would receive his own inheritance. Portions would be distributed to him at various milestones throughout his life. The final and largest transfer would occur after he completed college and reached adulthood. Eventually, he would assume control of the family business and inherit the majority of his father's assets. Most children spend their lives wondering what they will become. Tate never had to wonder. Everyone around him already knew. His path had been chosen before he could walk. Yet despite all of that pressure, Tate's childhood was remarkably happy. He grew up in a sprawling estate with more rooms than most families could fill. The house sat behind iron gates and carefully maintained gardens. There was a swimming pool, tennis courts, guest houses, and enough land that a child could spend an entire day exploring without seeing every corner of the property. The Blue Mansion had 30 bedrooms and 25 bathrooms within its walls. There were several drawing rooms and 2 kitchens on the ground floor. The estate was vast with 175 acres of greenery, gardens, and shrubs. Tate's childhood was filled with gifts, expensive possessions, and access to the best of everything money could buy. If Tate wanted something, it usually appeared. The best toys, the newest bicycles, expensive clothes, private tutors, family vacations. Anything money could purchase was available to him. He never worried about whether there would be food on the table or whether the bills would be paid. Those concerns simply did not exist in his world. His parents adored him. His uncles spoiled him. His aunts loved him. The kids at school treated him kindly. By every conventional measure, Tate's childhood was perfect. He had opportunities that most children would never experience. He attended excellent summer camps, received private instruction whenever he needed help, and was encouraged to pursue any hobby that interested him. Girls liked him. Adults praised him. Teachers admired him. Other children often wanted to be his friend simply because he was Tate Blue. Terence had originally planned to send him to one of the most prestigious private schools in Los Angeles. The school accepted only a small number of students each year, and attendance there practically guaranteed access to elite universities and influential social circles. For the Blue family, the tuition would have been insignificant. Terence could have paid for it without a second thought. But there was one problem. I couldn't afford to attend a school like that. Not even remotely. My family didn't have money. The tuition alone was more than we could have imagined paying. Terence knew how close Tate and I were. By the time the decision had to be made, separating us would have been nearly impossible. The two of us spent so much time together that most people expected to see one whenever the other was nearby. So instead of sending Tate to the elite private academy, Terence made a decision that surprised many people. He enrolled Tate in a local school that was free to attend. A school where I could go too. It was one of the few times in Tate's life when wealth and privilege took a backseat to something else. Companionship. And if anyone questioned the decision, Tate never seemed to mind. For all the opportunities money gave him, the thing he valued most wasn't the inheritance waiting for him, the family business, or the enormous fortune he would one day possess. It was making sure that when school started each morning, I was sitting at the desk beside him. Tate's life was the kind of life people imagined when they spoke about luck. From the day he was born, the world seemed determined to give him every possible advantage. He lived surrounded by comfort, stability, and affection. There were no dramatic family feuds, no financial hardships, no uncertainty about where his future was headed. The Blue family had spent generations building wealth, and by the time Tate arrived, that wealth had transformed into a lifestyle most people only saw in a Forbes magazine. His childhood home was beautiful, warm, and full of life. The estate itself was impressive, but what made it special wasn't the size of the house or the expensive furniture. It was the people who filled it. Tate was deeply loved. His father, Terence, was a successful businessman, but he never allowed his work to overshadow his role as a parent. Whenever Tate wanted to show off a drawing, tell a story, or share some new discovery, Terence made time to listen. He expected a great deal from his son, but those expectations were always accompanied by pride and affection. His mother, Talia, was equally devoted. Being an only child herself, she understood the unique loneliness that could sometimes accompany a quiet household. She knew what it felt like to have no brothers or sisters to play with, no siblings to share secrets with, and no built-in companions during childhood. Because of that, she paid close attention to Tate's happiness and made sure he never felt isolated. Although Tate had no brothers or sisters, he was never short on family. His grandmother had passed away several years earlier, and his grandfather had died shortly before Tate and me met in preschool. By most standards, that would have left a noticeable void in his life. Yet somehow it never did. The reason was simple. His aunts and uncles adored him. Tate only had 2 uncles and 2 aunts, but they treated him as if he were the most important child in the world. Tate didn't have any cousins or distant relatives because his mother was an only child. None of Terrence's siblings had children. His father had 2 brothers, and both sets of his grandparents had died. Tim, Julia, and Lydia lived on the East Coast, while Joey was in Europe being educated in academia. Every other weekend, Tate's relatives seemed to find some excuse to visit California. Sometimes they arrived with gifts, other times they came simply to spend time with him. His Uncle Tim, aunts including Talia and Terrence were in their 40s, but Joey was only 10 years older than Tate, no matter how busy their lives became. They made room for Tate by visiting or writing letters. Family dinners became celebrations. Holiday gatherings became events. Birthdays felt like national holidays. Whenever his relatives arrived, the house seemed to grow brighter. Laughter filled the rooms. Stories were shared around the dinner table. Tate would spend entire weekends surrounded by people who genuinely enjoyed being with him. Not because he was the heir to a fortune. Not because of his family's name. But because they loved him. Looking back, it is difficult to imagine a childhood with more support. Everyone in Tate's world wanted him to succeed. Everyone encouraged him. Everyone protected him. Everyone cared about him. Then there were the material comforts. Tate never lacked for anything. If a new toy was released, he immediately owned it. If a new video game system hit the market, it appeared in his bedroom shortly afterward. The newest electronics, the nicest bicycles, the best sporting equipment, the latest fashions, everything seemed to find its way into Tate's possession. His bedroom looked like something out of a catalog. Shelves were lined with collectibles. Closets were filled with clothes. His desk held gadgets most adults didn't even own. For many years, Tate's birthday was the one day of the year when reality seemed to bend around his wishes. Most children spent weeks hopping for a particular toy or a special cake. Tate spent weeks imagining entire experiences, and somehow those imaginings had a habit of becoming real. The process usually began months before his birthday. Talia would sit beside him at breakfast or during a quiet afternoon and ask the same question she asked every year. "What do you want for your birthday, sweetheart?" It sounded simple enough, but Tate knew it wasn't an ordinary question. She wasn't asking what present he wanted to unwrap. She was asking what kind of dream he wanted to live. If Tate became fascinated with horses, pony rides might appear on the sprawling lawns of the estate. If he spent weeks talking about the circus, Talia would quietly begin making phone calls, exploring every possibility until circus performers and exotic animals became part of the celebration. If a famous singer captured Tate's imagination, she would investigate whether that singer, or someone equally remarkable, could be persuaded to attend. Nothing was automatically dismissed. Nothing was considered too ambitious to explore. While other parents might smile and explain why something wasn't possible, Talia's first instinct was always to ask how it could be done. Money erased obstacles that most families never had the opportunity to challenge. Transportation could be arranged. Performers could be hired. Venues could be transformed. Experts could be consulted. Entire environments could be constructed from scratch if necessary. As Tate grew older, he gradually realized that this wasn't normal. Most children didn't casually mention wanting a carnival and then watch construction crews spend days building one. Most children didn't wonder aloud what it would be like to meet a particular performer and then discover their parents had spent weeks trying to make the meeting happen. Most children learned to separate fantasy from reality. Tate grew up watching the line between them blur. By the time his birthday arrived each year, anticipation spread throughout the household. Staff moved with unusual urgency. Decorators arrived carrying boxes of supplies. Florists delivered arrangements. Caterers came and went through the service entrance. Large trucks appeared in the driveway carrying equipment that no one bothered explaining to Tate because surprises were part of the tradition. The estate itself seemed to transform. Every hallway buzzed with preparation. Every room held some new secret. Every adult appeared to know something Tate didn't. And Tate loved every second of it. Not because he was spoiled, though many people assumed that was the explanation, but because there was something magical about watching an idea leave his imagination and appear in the real world. For one day each year, impossible things felt possible. For one day each year, adults treated a child's wildest dreams as serious plans worthy of attention and effort. And because Talia loved her son with a fierce, determined devotion, she approached every birthday with the same philosophy. If it could be done, she would find a way. If it couldn't be done, she would find the closest thing to it. And if Tate wanted something extraordinary, she would move heaven and earth trying to make him smile. On Tate's 10th birthday, the question had come months earlier, just as it always did. "What do you want this year?" Talia had asked. Most 10-year-olds might have asked for a bicycle, a video game, or the newest toy everyone was talking about. Tate had chosen something else. A boa constrictor. Not to own permanently, necessarily, at least that wasn't how he'd explained it. He had recently become fascinated by reptiles and had spent weeks reading books, watching documentaries, and talking endlessly about snakes. The larger the snake, the more fascinated he became. Most parents would have laughed and redirected the conversation. Talia simply nodded. A few phone calls later, the request had become a plan. On the afternoon of Tate's birthday, dozens of children ran across the estate's sprawling lawn, darting between games, tables loaded with food, and birthday attractions. Nobody knew exactly what the big surprise would be, only that Tate's parties always included something memorable. Then a large vehicle pulled into the driveway. The excitement spread immediately. Children abandoned half-eaten slices of cake and unfinished games to crowd around the arrival. A reptile expert stepped out carrying several secured containers and equipment. And then came the star attraction. A massive boa constrictor measuring nearly 12 feet long. The collective gasp from the crowd was immediate. Some of the children squealed with excitement. Others stared in awe. The snake's patterned scales shimmered in the afternoon sunlight as the handler carefully introduced it to the group, explaining its habits, behavior, and temperament. Tate looked absolutely delighted. His eyes were bright with excitement as he moved closer, listening to every word the expert said. The birthday boy was completely captivated. The other children gathered around, eager for their chance to touch the enormous reptile. Everyone, that is, except Noah. The moment Noah saw the snake, every ounce of color drained from his face. He froze. For a second he couldn't even speak. The snake seemed impossibly large. Its body looked thick as a tree branch. Its slow movements somehow made it even more terrifying. "Nope." That single word escaped before Noah turned and bolted. Several children laughed as he sprinted across the lawn. "Noah," someone called. But Noah wasn't stopping. He ran straight for the nearest picnic area and dove underneath one of the long wooden tables, crouching between the table legs like he was hiding from a monster. From his perspective, he was. The sounds of the party continued around him as he wrapped his arms around his knees. The snake was nowhere near him. The expert had complete control. The animal wasn't dangerous. None of that mattered. Noah was terrified. Absolutely, completely terrified. A few minutes later, Tate finally noticed his buddy was missing. While everyone else crowded around the boa constrictor, Tate scanned the lawn looking for Noah. It didn't take long to find him. A pair of sneakers stuck out from beneath one of the picnic tables. Tate immediately understood. Of course Noah was hiding. He couldn't help laughing. Not cruelly. Just because the sight of Noah wedged underneath a picnic table while a perfectly calm snake sat hundreds of feet away was objectively funny. "Noah. No." Tate crouched beside the table. "No. You haven't even touched it." "No. It's nice." "No. It doesn't bite." "No." The response came faster this time. Tate grinned. Children continued taking turns holding sections of the giant snake while Noah remained firmly under the table, refusing to come out. By the end of the afternoon, nearly every child at the party had touched the boa constrictor. Every child except Noah. But so was the sight of Noah hiding beneath a picnic table, absolutely convinced that 12 feet of scales and muscle was coming for him next. Noah had spent nearly 20 minutes hiding beneath the picnic table before Tate finally managed to convince him to come out. Tate, absolutely not. Come on. No. It's harmless. No. 12 feet of harmless. Noah folded his arms stubbornly. Tate, that thing could eat me. The statement was ridiculous enough that Tate burst out laughing. It cannot eat you. It absolutely can. It absolutely cannot. The reptile expert standing nearby tried unsuccessfully to hide a smile. Tate rolled his eyes before lowering his voice. Fine. Noah narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Fine what? If you do this, I'll take you to Six Flags next weekend. Noah immediately hesitated. That wasn't fair. Tate knew exactly how much Noah loved Six Flags. Tate. Six Flags. No. Front row roller coasters. Tate. Unlimited cotton candy. Noah groaned. The offer was working. A few minutes later, against every survival instinct he possessed, Noah found himself standing beside Tate near the enormous boa constrictor. His legs felt weak. His hands were shaking. The snake looked even bigger up close. Nope. Before Noah could retreat, Tate gently tied a blindfold around his eyes. What are you doing? You keep freaking out because you're looking at it. Because it's a giant snake. You can't see it now. That doesn't make it disappear. Tate laughed. The sound helped a little. Only a little. Noah stood completely rigid while the reptile expert carefully positioned part of the boa's body across his forearms. The weight settled slowly. Heavy. Cool. Muscular. Very, very alive. Noah nearly jumped out of his skin. Tate. It's okay. Tate. It's okay, Tate repeated, standing directly beside him. I've got you. Noah's breathing quickened. The snake shifted slightly. Noah made a noise somewhere between a squeak and a scream. Tate. It won't hurt you. Noah's grip tightened. Tate. I promise. The confidence in Tate's voice was unwavering. Noah could hear him smiling. It's friendly. No snake is friendly. This one is. No. Yes. No. The boa slowly adjusted itself across Noah's arms. Nothing happened. No biting. No striking. No attempt to eat him alive. Just a slow, gentle movement. Tate remained beside him the entire time. See. Noah swallowed hard. The panic hadn't disappeared, but it wasn't getting worse anymore either. It's not hurting you. No. It's just sitting there. I know. It's actually been pretty nice. It's still a snake. Tate laughed again. The sound was warm and familiar. Noah focused on that instead of the enormous reptile draped across his arms. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The snake remained calm. The handler remained calm. Tate remained calm. Eventually, Noah's shoulders relaxed by the smallest amount. There you go, Tate said softly. Noah still hated every second of it. He was still trembling. Still convinced this was a terrible idea. But the world hadn't ended. And because Tate was standing beside him, sounding completely certain that everything was fine, Noah managed to stay exactly where he was. When the snake was finally lifted away a minute later, Noah ripped the blindfold off and immediately stepped backward. Noah went behind Tate, trying to hide from the snake while Tate was laughing. The boa constrictor remained perfectly uninterested in him. Tate, meanwhile, looked absurdly pleased with himself. I did it, I got you to touch a big snakey. No, Noah said. You did. Tate. Tate grinned. You held a giant snake. No. You literally did. Nope. You were brave. I was bribed. That made Tate laugh so hard he nearly doubled over, while Noah pointed accusingly at him. Six Flags. Six Flags, Tate agreed. And despite the terror, Noah couldn't help smiling a little too. The moment Noah finally escaped the boa constrictor's grasp, he put as much distance between himself and the reptile as possible. Meanwhile, Tate looked completely enchanted. The massive snake rested comfortably across his shoulders and arms while the reptile expert supervised nearby. Tate gently stroked the patterned scales running along its back, utterly fascinated. "Look at him," Tate said. Noah remained several yards away. "No. Isn't he cute?" "No." Tate laughed. The snake slowly wrapped part of its body around his forearm while he continued petting it. "Who's a good snake?" Tate cooed. "You are, yes you are." "Tate." The warning in Noah's voice only made Tate grin wider. "I think I found my new bed warmer." Noah's eyes widened. "Tate. He's quiet." "Tate. He doesn't complain." "Tate. He seems very affectionate." The serpent slowly shifted against Tate's shoulder. Tate looked delighted. Noah looked horrified. "You know," Tate continued thoughtfully, "maybe I'll replace you with a giant snake." Noah immediately scowled. "Get that thing away from me before it eats me." The reptile expert nearly choked trying not to laugh. "It is not going to eat you." That's exactly what a snake expert would say. Tate laughed so hard he almost lost his grip on the boa. "Noah, look at him." "No. He's adorable. He's 12 feet long. He's friendly. He's plotting my death." The snake chose that exact moment to flick its tongue. Noah took another step backward. "See, plotting." Tate shook his head. "You are impossible. The snake is smelling his environment to plot your demise." "I'm alive." "Barely." Noah folded his arms. "Tate, if that thing gets within 10 feet of me again, our relationship is over." Tate gasped dramatically. "You'd leave me for a snake." "No, I'd leave you because of a snake." The distinction made several nearby adults laugh. Tate looked down at the boa constrictor. "Sorry, buddy," Noah's jealous. "I am not jealous of a serpent." The snake lazily draped itself farther around Tate's shoulders. Tate smiled. "See, he likes me." "Good. Good. Keep him." Tate laughed. "You really hate snakes." "I fear them." "There's a difference." "No." Tate glanced over at Noah, who was trying very hard not to laugh. The large serpent lay stretched comfortably across the couch cushions, completely relaxed and seemingly pleased with the attention it was receiving. Tate sighed dramatically. "Well," he announced, "I guess I'll just have to give all of my Noah affection to the serpent." Noah rolled his eyes. "The serpent." "The serpent," Tate confirmed solemnly. As though making a great sacrifice, Tate leaned down toward the snake. "Since Noah clearly doesn't appreciate me." Noah snorted. "Oh please." But Tate ignored him. Instead, he began showering the reptile with exaggerated affection. "Moi." A kiss on the top of its head. "Moi." Another. "Moi, moi, moi, moi." Each kiss grew louder and more ridiculous than the last. The serpent remained completely unbothered. In fact, it seemed almost proud of itself. "There," Tate said, "someone appreciates me." Noah laughed. "The snake doesn't know what's happening." "That's not true." Tate gently rubbed the serpent's head. "We have a deep emotional connection." The snake blinked. "See," Tate said triumphantly, "that's an agreement." Noah shook his head. "You're insane." "I am beloved. By a snake. Especially by a snake." Tate immediately leaned down again. "Moi, moi, moi." The ridiculous kissing noises echoed through the room. Noah finally broke into helpless laughter. Tate looked up with a grin. "There we go." "What? You laughed?" Noah groaned. "You were doing that on purpose." "Of course I was." Tate gave the serpent one final dramatic kiss. "Moi." Then he pointed at it. "The serpent understands comedy." The snake remained motionless. Tate nodded seriously. Truly a creature of exceptional intelligence. That only made Noah laugh harder. For the rest of the afternoon, Tate remained fascinated by the giant reptile while Noah kept a careful eye on both of them from a safe distance. And every time Tate started walking in Noah's direction with the snake still draped around his shoulders, Noah immediately moved somewhere else. Just to be safe. Noah stood at the edge of the lawn for a long moment, arms folded tight across his chest, watching the scene like he wasn't sure whether to be offended or just permanently alarmed. Tate didn't even look the same out there. He was completely absorbed, laughing softly, murmuring nonsense at the enormous snake like it was some kind of affectionate pet instead of a living rope with instincts and teeth. The boa constrictor was draped around him in thick loops, resting across his shoulders, sliding slowly along his arms as Tate stroked it with an ease that made Noah's stomach twist. It wasn't even that Tate was paying attention to the snake. It was how. Like it mattered. It was interesting. Like it was chosen. Noah's jaw tightened. The snake flicked its tongue again, and Tate leaned in slightly as if responding to something unspoken, still smiling. That was the part that did it. Noah turned away. Fast. Jealous. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked back toward the house, pretending he didn't care that his chest felt oddly tight for reasons he didn't want to name. Inside, the kitchen was cooler and quieter, the noise of the party muffled into something distant and harmless. Plates had been set out earlier, half-finished slices of cake, untouched drinks, scattered napkins that the staff would clean up later. Noah grabbed nothing. He just stood there. Then he leaned against the counter and pouted properly, like a problem had followed him indoors and refused to be ignored. Outside, Tate's voice carried faintly through the open doors, light, amused, still completely wrapped up in whatever conversation he was having with the snake. Noah exhaled sharply through his nose. "It's a snake," he muttered to himself, like repeating it might fix something. But it didn't change the fact that Tate looked entirely captivated. Not in a dangerous way. Just attentive. Focused. The kind of attention Noah was used to being on the receiving end of. He frowned harder. "I don't even like snakes," he added quietly as if that explained everything. A few minutes passed. The sound of laughter drifted in again from outside, followed by Tate saying something that made the reptile expert laugh too. Noah glanced toward the doorway, then looked away immediately. Nope, he decided under his breath, and stayed in the kitchen a little longer, pouting at absolutely nothing, while the party continued without him for the moment. By the time the party started winding down, the estate had shifted into its quieter after-hours state. The loudest parts of the celebration faded first, the games packed away, the entertainers departing in groups, the last trays of food being carried back inside by staff moving with practiced efficiency. What had been a sprawling world of noise and motion slowly collapsed back into order. Near the edge of the lawn, the reptile expert prepared the boa constrictor for transport. Tate lingered longer than most of the guests. He stood close while the snake was carefully guided back into its secured container, watching with a reluctant kind of attention, like he didn't quite want the moment to end. Only a few minutes earlier he'd been completely absorbed in it, curious, amused, oddly gentle with something most people would have kept their distance from. Now, as the crate was sealed and lifted away, the space it had occupied suddenly felt emptier. Tate glanced around briefly, as if expecting Noah to still be nearby. He wasn't. That realization didn't register as urgent at first. Noah often wandered off during parties, especially when things became too loud or too crowded. Tate assumed he'd simply gone somewhere quieter, maybe inside, maybe upstairs, maybe sitting somewhere dramatic in a way only Noah could manage. So he didn't think much of it in the moment. Instead, he stayed outside a little longer, answering a few last comments from guests, exchanging brief words with adults who were beginning to leave. The birthday atmosphere softened into polite endings and closing conversations. Eventually, even that faded. And only then did Tate start looking properly. He checked the usual places first: the back patio, the edge of the garden, the shaded seating areas where Noah sometimes retreated when he needed space. He called his name once, then again, assuming he just wasn't being heard over the final cleanup. No response. That was when Tate finally turned toward the house. Inside, the noise was gone entirely. The hallways were dimmer now, the brightness of the afternoon replaced by the softer lighting of evening. Decorations still hung in places, slightly out of place now that the energy of the party had disappeared. Tate moved upstairs. Noah's usual spots were empty. Room after room gave him nothing but silence. Eventually, he reached his own bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. That alone made him pause. When he pushed it open fully, the room was quiet except for the faint rustle of bedding. Noah was there. Curled up in Tate's bed, completely under the covers as if trying to disappear into them. Only the uneven rise and fall of the blanket showed he was even awake. Tate stopped in the doorway. "Noah." No answer came immediately. The silence felt different from earlier, less like avoidance, more like something folded inward. Tate stepped inside slowly. Noah didn't move. Just pulled the covers a little tighter over his head. Tate frowned slightly, taking in the scene, the closed-off posture, the refusal to look, the way Noah had positioned himself like he didn't want to be seen at all. "What are you doing up here?" Still nothing. A beat passed. Then muffled from under the blanket. "Nothing." Tate exhaled quietly through his nose, walking closer to the bed. "You left the party." Noah shifted slightly but didn't emerge. "Yeah." Tate sat down on the edge of the mattress, more slowly now, like he was trying not to push too hard. For a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at the bundled shape under the covers. "You've been up here the whole time." A pause. Then, "Yeah." Tate's expression changed slightly, not sharp but more focused now, as something had finally clicked into place that he hadn't been paying attention to earlier. "Because of earlier." No response. But the silence this time was louder. Tate leaned back a little, hands resting loosely on his knees. "Oh, were you jealous of Austin? That's the snake's name." That small sound carried more understanding than anything else he'd said so far. From under the covers, Noah finally shifted again, frustrated rather than calm now. "You were busy," he muttered. Tate blinked. "With the snake." A pause. "Yeah." Tate stared at him for a second, then let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Noah." The blanket tightened again. "I didn't replace you with a snake." Silence. Then Noah's voice, smaller but sharper. "You spent 2 hours with it." Tate tilted his head slightly. "And you think that means something?" Noah didn't answer right away. Because it did feel like something in the moment, even if saying it out loud made it sound less reasonable. Tate stayed where he was, patient but steady. "I was at my birthday party," he said simply. "You ran off." "I didn't run off. You hid under a table earlier." "That was different." A pause. Then Tate's voice softened just slightly. "I wasn't ignoring you." Noah didn't respond. But the blanket loosened a fraction. Tate stayed seated on the bed, not pressing further, just letting the silence settle into something less sharp than before. Noah's breathing was uneven when Tate sat down on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet now, the last traces of the party gone from downstairs. What remained felt strangely hollow compared to the noise that had filled the estate all day. Even the decorations outside couldn't quite mask the shift from celebration to stillness. Noah stayed curled under the covers, as if the blanket could create distance from everything he didn't want to deal with. Tate didn't touch him at first. He just sat there watching the small rise and fall of the blanket, listening to the uneven silence between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had been earlier. "Hey." "Nothing." Noah didn't move. Tate leaned a little closer, not enough to crowd him, just enough to be heard. "Noah, I didn't ignore you." A pause. Then Noah's voice came out muffled and tight. "You did." That one word carried more feeling than the entire argument they hadn't really had yet. Tate exhaled slowly, like he was trying to understand the shape of it. "I was messing around," he said, "with the snake, that's all it was." The blanket shifted slightly. "You were with it all day." "That's not true." "It felt like it." That made Tate stop. Because Noah didn't usually say things like that unless he meant them. There was another pause before Tate spoke again, more carefully this time. "You thought I was, what?" No answer at first. Then Noah quieter. "You were paying attention to it." Tate blinked. "Oh." That single sound changed the tone completely. Not dismissive, not amused anymore, just realized landing where it should have been earlier. From under the covers came a small, frustrated breath. It's stupid, Noah muttered, forget it. Tate shook his head slightly. No, he said, don't do that. That made Noah shift just a little, like he was deciding whether to stay hidden or not. Tate stayed where he was, steady. You weren't stupid, he added, you were jealous and upset. Silence. A longer one this time. Eventually, Noah pushed the blanket down just enough for his voice to be clearer, though he still wasn't looking at him. You were acting like it was the best thing ever. Tate almost smiled at the memory, but stopped himself before it turned into something that would make Noah retreat again. It was a snake, he said simply. It was new, that's all. Noah didn't respond. So Tate added, a little more honest now. But I get what you're saying. That got Noah to glance at him briefly. Tate continued. I didn't think about how it looked or how it felt from your side. A pause. Then quieter. I'm sorry. No performance, no decoration around it, just direct. Noah's expression tightened slightly, like he wasn't sure what to do with that. Tate shifted a little closer, not touching him yet, just close enough to be present. I wasn't replacing you with anything, he said, I was just distracted. Noah finally let out a small, shaky breath that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite relief. That thing was disgusting, he muttered. Tate actually smiled this time. Yeah, he agreed, it kind of was. That broke the tension just enough. Noah pulled the blanket down a bit more, eyes still wary but less closed off. Tate didn't reach for him immediately, he waited, like he always seemed to do when it mattered. Can I sit closer, he asked. A pause. Then Noah reluctantly. Yeah. Tate shifted in, careful not to crowd him, just enough that the space between them felt less sharp. I'm not replacing you, he said again, softer now, not with anything. Noah didn't answer right away. But he didn't pull away either. And that, for them, was the beginning of things settling back into place. The refrigerator in the Blue House was always stocked with whatever foods Tate liked most. Professional chefs catered many family events, and even ordinary meals were prepared with care. Tate ate foods that I had never heard of before meeting him. He traveled. He attended events. He experienced luxuries that most children would spend their entire lives dreaming about. Yet none of those things were what made his childhood special. What made it special was the complete absence of cruelty. Nobody in Tate's family was unkind. Nobody belittled him. Nobody made him feel unwanted. Nobody treated affection as something that had to be earned. His home was a place where he was valued simply because he existed. Everything in Tate's world seemed to fit together perfectly. There were no obvious cracks. No hidden tragedies. No looming disasters. At least from where I stood, his life looked perfect. In many ways it was. I often thought Tate was living the American dream. And honestly, I suppose he was. He had wealth. He had opportunities. He had security. He had a family that loved him. He had a future waiting for him. Most people would have looked at Tate Blue and assumed he possessed everything a person could ever want. What fascinated me was that, out of all the people he could have chosen to share that perfect world with, he chose me. I came from an entirely different background. I didn't have his money. I didn't have his opportunities. I didn't have his family connections. By every social expectation imaginable, Tate should have gravitated toward people from his own world. The sons and daughters of executives. The children of politicians. Other wealthy families. People who attended private schools and spent summers at country clubs. Instead, he chose me. More surprisingly, he never acted as though I was fortunate to be there. Tate always insisted that he was the lucky one. No matter how many advantages he possessed, he spoke as though my presence in his life was some extraordinary gift. He never treated me like a charity case. Never acted as though I owed him gratitude. Never reminded me of the difference between us. In his eyes, there wasn't a difference. Rich boys like Tate didn't usually spend their lives attached to working-class kids. The social divide was real. Most people noticed it immediately. Tate noticed it and ignored it. That was the difference. He could absolutely be snobby when he wanted to be. He could be arrogant, stubborn, and occasionally so self-important that people wanted to roll their eyes at him. But none of that existed when he looked at me. When it came to us, there was no social class, no hierarchy, no distinction. He treated me as an equal from the day we met. My background didn't matter. My lack of money didn't matter. The difficulties in my life didn't matter. Tate behaved as though those obstacles simply didn't exist. If he had something, he wanted to share it. If he bought something, he wanted me included. If there was room beside him, he expected me to occupy it. His wealth wasn't something he used to elevate himself above me. It was simply another resource he could use to make me happy. That had been true when we were children. It remained true when we became teenagers. And by 18 years old, there was still no indication that Tate intended to change. The rest of the world could have his family's fortune. They could have the business. They could have the inheritance. They could have the prestige attached to the blue name. Tate loved me over every advantage he was born into and never let me forget it. Tate Blue had always been physically mature beyond his years, but emotionally he often seemed overwhelmed by himself. To anyone looking in from the outside, he appeared like the perfect heir to an immense family fortune, composed, well-dressed, confident in the effortless way wealth seemed to follow him. The blue name carried influence that stretched across business circles and social networks, and Tate had grown up inside that structure without ever needing to question whether the world would make space for him. It always did. But inside the walls of that life, things were more complicated than they first appeared. Talia, his mother, had once described it to me carefully, as if choosing each word mattered. She never spoke about it openly and she never used labels, but she worried about the way Tate handled overwhelming emotions. Tate's mom said that her son had arrested development, which had begun 3 years ago when Tate was 15. It wasn't that he lacked intelligence or awareness. He understood things clearly in calm moments. But when strong feelings hit him, everything seemed to arrive at once, too fast to sort through. Tate would revert to being 5 years old when he couldn't or wouldn't express what he was feeling emotionally, which sometimes resulted in Tate breaking expensive miniatures or throwing a physical tantrum. Anger, frustration, embarrassment, sadness, whatever it was, it didn't stay contained. It spilled outward. There were moments when he would leave a conversation abruptly, his steps heavy and uneven with emotion, as though distance itself might help him regain control. Other times it would come out in sharp bursts of movement, doors closing too hard, objects shoved aside, a voice raised before he had fully decided to raise it. It wasn't calculated or deliberate. It was immediate, like a reflex he couldn't interrupt once it started. Talia had tried more than once to help him understand what was happening. She suggested doctors, evaluations, and conversations with specialists who might have been able to give shape to what she was seeing. But those attempts rarely ended in a way that allowed follow-through. Tate resisted anything that made him feel observed too closely in those moments, and when pressure increased, so did his reactions. It became difficult to bring him into calm discussions once he felt cornered. Over time, those efforts became less frequent. In their place was a kind of reluctant household compromise. If something set him off, the goal became resolution rather than correction. The faster the tension faded, the better. Terence, his father, tended to step in the same way, direct, practical, focused on restoring order rather than dissecting what had caused the disruption in the first place. He had the temperament of a man who managed empires. He solved problems quickly, even emotional ones, by removing whatever made them escalate. When emotions or events caught Tate off guard, he could sometimes escalate into breaking things or stomping his foot like a 5-year-old wanting his own way. He really didn't do it around me, but occasionally when something happened and Tate was terrified, he would act like a child. And in a house like theirs, that approach worked, at least on the surface. Because the Blue household was not a chaotic place. It was polished, controlled, and outwardly seamless. But beneath that stability was a pattern that repeated itself quietly over the years. Whenever Tate's emotions surged beyond what he could manage, the world around him adjusted to accommodate the wave rather than confront it head-on. What made it more difficult to explain was how different he could be when he was calm. In quiet moments he was thoughtful, even gentle. He could listen, reflect, and understand things with surprising clarity. It was as if there were two versions of him, one steady and composed, and another that surfaced only when emotion took over. And no matter how complicated that made him, there was one constant in his life that never seemed to shift. May. Because even in his most overwhelming moments when everything else felt unstable, I was the person he always seemed to come back to. As far as Tate was concerned, the person he valued most had never changed. I was still his favorite person in the world. And after all those years, he saw no reason why that should ever be different. Tate had a way of expecting things without ever saying them out loud. Not in a demanding sense, at least not directly, but in the quiet assumption that certain parts of the day simply belonged to the two of us. Night was one of those parts. Most evenings I was already there before he was. The rhythm had formed on its own over time, without discussion or agreement, as it had always been the most natural arrangement in the world. His room would be dim, the house settling into its nighttime stillness, and I would already be in bed waiting, half reading, half listening for the sound of him coming up the stairs. Tate never had to ask. He would walk in, see me there, and something in his expression would ease immediately, as the day had finally reached its correct ending. During the day, it was the same in a different way. If he was home, I was usually nearby in the same room, not always speaking but present in the orbit he naturally moved through. It wasn't something either of us negotiated. It was just how things had become over time, two lives overlapping until distance felt more unusual than closeness. Tate didn't require much from the people around him in general. He wasn't someone who needed constant entertainment or constant conversation, but he did notice when something familiar was missing. When I wasn't there, when I was delayed, distracted, or simply elsewhere longer than usual, it affected him in ways he didn't always hide well. Not anger exactly. More like a visible shift in focus, a restlessness that crept into his movements, a shortness in patience that didn't match his usual composure. He wasn't used to absence in the spaces he considered steady. And I had become one of those spaces. Sometimes he would say it outright, though never harshly. "Where were you?" Not as an accusation. As a check against something not aligning the way he expected it to. Other times he would go quiet instead, and the quiet itself would carry more weight than any complaint. But it never lasted long. Because whatever tension appeared between us in those moments, it always seemed to resolve the same way it began, with proximity returning, with one of us finding the other again, with the unspoken understanding that neither of us stayed distant for long. Tate didn't ask for much from the world. But he had learned, somewhere along the way, to associate certain presences with stability. And I had become one of them. Not as something owed. Just something he always seemed to notice when it wasn't there. We fought sometimes, but the worst fight we had when we were kids was in 1983. The argument exploded the day after Tate turned 15, the air in the upstairs bedroom thick with leftover birthday cake and resentment. I stood by the dresser, arms crossed, while Tate paced in front of the bed with his fists clenched. "You're so fucking possessive," Noah snapped first, voice already rising. "Every time I talk to anyone else you glare as if you own me. It's controlling, Tate. You're jealous of my own shadow and you make everything about you." Tate stopped packing and turned on you, eyes flashing. "Own you? I don't own you, but I see the way they look at you and how you smile back. You think I don't notice when you laugh at their jokes longer than you need to. You act like you're a stranger when I'm right there." "Because I am allowed to have a life outside of you," I shouted back. "You're jealous of everything, my phone, my time, even the way I breathe without asking your permission. It's exhausting." Tate stepped closer, voice dropping but still sharp. "Exhausting? Try watching the person you love flirt with half the room while you stand there like an idiot. You want space? Fine, go fuck around with them then. Maybe that's what you really want instead of being stuck with me." The words hit like a slap. "Stuck with you? Don't twist this. You're the one who can't handle anyone else existing near me. You don't care about me, Tate. I'm just your bed warmer. You use me when you feel like it and then act as if I belong to you." Tate's face twisted. "Bed warmer? Is that what you think? That I only keep you around to get warm? Maybe I should just let you leave then. Go downstairs and sleep on the couch if you hate me so much." I grabbed my pillow and blanket, storming out without another word. The stairs creaked under my feet as I descended into the dark living room. I threw myself onto the couch, heart pounding, not caring if I ever spoke to him again. The things he said about me wanting to leave, about being single, about not needing him, they stung worse than anything before. Cruel and new. I knew he was angry and didn't mean half of it, but that didn't erase how it landed. Hours passed. The house stayed quiet except for the clock ticking. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Tate's silhouette appeared in the doorway, smaller than usual in the low light. He crossed the room slowly and knelt beside the couch. Nimble fingers reached out to stroke my hair gently. I swatted his hand away without opening my eyes. Undeterred, Tate climbed onto the narrow couch behind me, pressing his body against my back. His arms slid around my waist carefully. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my neck. "It's all my fault. I was going through something and I took it out on you. I'm so sorry." He kissed my cheek, then the curve of my shoulder, his lips warm and lingering. His hand caressed slowly down my arm. "Don't be angry at me. I don't ever want to be parted from you. I never meant any of it." I stayed rigid for a long moment, the anger still simmering, then his voice cracked again. "Please don't go. I'll do anything for you to stay." The fight replayed in my head, the accusations of jealousy, the claim you were trying to leave, the cruel retorts about being used, yet the way he held you now, trembling slightly, made the rage soften. You turned in his arms, facing him on the cramped couch. My forehead rested against his. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "just don't say those things again." Tate nodded, pulling you tighter. "I won't, never again." The two of us were lying on the couch, tangled together until dawn, the hateful words fading into the background while we loved each other. From that night on, we both tried harder, avoiding fights and unkind words whenever possible, at least until we were both adults. The memory of that birthday argument stayed as a reminder to choose closeness over cruelty. I'd often wondered why Tate held me so close at night, why he spooned me like I was both shield and warmth. Then came a really cold morning in January a few years ago. Tate shivered violently as he climbed into bed beside me, his body trembling. "It's freezing," Tate muttered, teeth chattering. "Get over here," he demanded suddenly, pulling me against him. His arms and legs wrapped around me like a human cocoon, trying to steal every bit of heat I had. "You're a massive toaster oven, Noah," he said, nuzzling his face into my hair. "Seriously, you're like a human heater, always so warm. Your body's like a furnace or something. I don't know how you do it." Brr. He pressed closer, his chest against mine, letting out another shiver. "Your shoulders, toasty, your back is perfect, your legs, holy crap, you're like one of those electric blankets that actually work. I could stay like this forever and never be cold again." I laughed softly as he buried his face into my neck, nuzzling, murmuring, You're my heat source, Noah, my personal heater. I'm telling you, if it weren't for you, I'd be frozen solid by now." And that's when I realized, it wasn't just his habit of holding me that made me feel cherished. He actually needed me, my warmth, my presence, my body pressed against his as fiercely as he gave his own. Tate's obsession, his fiery devotion, his worshipful care, it wasn't just about possession. It was mutual sustenance, a rhythm of closeness, comfort, and reverence that bound us in ways words could never fully capture. Tate's red nose suddenly lodged itself into my neck and I couldn't help but scream. "Tate, your nose is freezing," I gasped, squirming. "Sorry," he muttered, voice muffled against my skin. Then he smirked, that infuriatingly mischievous glint in his eyes. "There's another part down here that's frozen solid," he said crudely, nudging closer. "You wouldn't be able to help me by warming that up," he joked, nudging me slightly. Gross, no," I said, pushing him away, though part of me couldn't help laughing. I lied, shaking my head. I would give anything to have the courage to help Tate warm up the sensitive area he had hinted at a moment earlier. Tate let out a long, exaggerated sigh, smirking in that infuriating way he had. "Too bad I don't have a girlfriend for that," he said, voice low, suggestive, but it wasn't sexual, not really. It was flirtatious, teasing, and utterly focused on me. I froze, half laughing, half groaning, and he chuckled, warm and low, against my shoulder. Even in his teasing, even in his crude little jokes, there was care, a desperate need for warmth, a way of pressing himself close without ever making it sexual. Even in his humor, even in the crude little jokes and sighs, there was care. There was an obsession. There was that fire of devotion that never let me forget I was his entirely and completely. And in that moment I could feel the full weight of it, his worship, his obsession, his fiery, protective love, all bundled into a laugh, a sigh, a smirk, and the steady warmth of him pressed against me. He was obsessed with me, body and soul, every inch of me a source of comfort, warmth, and devotion. And in moments like this I could feel it, the fire behind his obsession, the worship behind his teasing, and the intensity of a love that consumed him without ever crossing into desire. During my freshman year, the bullying turned physical. They found me between classes, behind the gym, anywhere teachers weren't looking. Hands grabbed at my clothes, shirts torn, shorts ripped, laughter sharp and ugly while I was shoved to the ground. I remember the sting more than the pain, the humiliation of it, the way it felt like the whole world had agreed I was allowed to be hurt. I never fought back. I just curled in on myself and waited for it to end. It always ended the same way. "Tate, He came like a storm, no hesitation, no fear of consequences, flooring anyone who dared touch me. He didn't lecture or threaten first, he acted. When it was over, when they were gone, he would take my hand and pull me up off the ground like it was the most natural thing in the world. He brushed the dirt from my clothes, checked my face with a softness no one ever saw, and pressed a kiss to my temple to calm me down. It wasn't romantic to him. It was comfort, protection, certainty. And standing there with his hand still wrapped around mine, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: no matter what people said about us, no one would ever hurt me while Tate was breathing. When we were 16, Tate's mom ruined that innocence with a careless remark at a dinner party, said too casually, too loudly, that Tate and I shared the same bed. I remember the way my stomach dropped when I realized what she'd done. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the truth had spread across the schoolyard like wildfire. I was terrified not of the rumors themselves, but of Tate rejecting me because of them, pulling away to protect himself. I didn't know if I could survive that kind of loss. "They share a bed, a twin bed," someone whispered in the hallways at school, tone dripping with mockery. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself people were just talking, just curious. But curiosity quickly turned to judgment, and judgment turned to rumor, and rumor to outright whispers that followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, in the hallways, even at the bus stop, I could feel eyes tracking me, imagining things, framing stories that didn't exist. "Look at Tate's boy," a girl whispered behind her hand at lunch. "Do you think, you know?" I ignored her, staring down at my tray, wishing the ground would open up and swallow me, but then I heard it again, muttered by a boy I'd known since middle school. "Bet they do more than sleep in that bed." The word stabbed at me, my chest tightened. I tried to tell myself it wasn't true, that our bed sharing had always been non-sexual, a ritual of intimacy and worship that only we understood, but even knowing it, the judgment stung. Tate didn't let it slide. At first he seethed quietly, jaw tight, nostrils flaring. By the next day he was cornering the worst offenders in the hallway, his voice low and dangerous. "You say that again," he growled, "and I swear you'll regret it." Then one boy, braver or stupider than the rest, muttered the gay slur loud enough for everyone to hear. Tate's hand shot out before I could react, and the kid went flying backward as Tate's knuckles raked his face. Gasps erupted. Teachers rushed over, hands raised, mouths open, but Tate didn't flinch. His gaze was fixed on me, protective, burning. But the whispers didn't stop. "Tate's boy is his pet. They must be together. Why does he let him sleep in his bed? That's weird, wrong." Even his family joined the chorus. Uncle Joey didn't hide his discomfort. "It's a bit weird for teen boys," he muttered at a barbecue, shaking his head. "Completely inappropriate." Others echoed the sentiment quietly, careful to couch it in concern, but the message was the same: Tate and I were the town's anomaly, the subject of constant scrutiny. And yet, none of it mattered to Tate. He leaned into me when whispers reached our ears, holding me closer, spooning me as though the rest of the world could burn, and he wouldn't let a single person touch me or my dignity. "They don't matter," he murmured into my hair, voice low but fiery. "None of them, not a single one. They don't see us, they can't touch us." His devotion was palpable. Every whispered slur directed at me, every rumor about our bed, every judgmental glance was met with his unflinching, possessive protection. And I began to notice the subtle rituals that kept us shielded from the gossip. He walked with me at all times, a wall of fire between me and anyone who dared approach. He touched me constantly, hands brushing my shoulder, resting on my back, hair tucked behind my ear, silent reminders that he was mine and I was safe. He rewarded my courage to ignore the whispers with gifts, small indulgences, and words of worship. Even at school, even when teachers whispered their disapproval, Tate's gaze never left me. Every time someone muttered a rumor, he would murmur, "Just for me, ignore them, I have you, I've always had you, always." There were nights I cried alone after a particularly cruel day. I tried to tell myself the whispers were true, that maybe we were weird, that maybe he only tolerated me for convenience, that maybe I wasn't cherished at all. But Tate never let me doubt him for long. He would find me, sometimes shivering in our bed, sometimes hiding in the bathroom, and hold me tight. He would rock me back and forth, press kisses to my nose, mutter ridiculous jokes, tease me, and wrap me in warmth, both physical and emotional, until I could breathe again. Even when the town branded us, even when Uncle Joey whispered warnings to Terrence, even when slurs and nicknames were thrown in the hallways, Tate remained constant. He didn't just protect me. He worshipped me, he adored me, he made me the singular focus of a devotion so intense it bordered on obsession. The rumors didn't matter, the whispers didn't touch us, not when he was holding me, not when he was gazing at me like I was the only thing worth seeing. And somewhere in the midst of it all, I realized the truth I'd always known: he was mine entirely and I was his. The world could whisper, scold, and judge all it wanted. Tate had already claimed me heart, body, and soul, and nothing, not gossip, not slurs, not disbelief, could take that away. I didn't have to wait long to find out where he stood. At lunch, a sophomore called me a fag loud enough for everyone to hear. Tate didn't say a word, he just punched him. Hard, no hesitation, no warning. It wasn't about proving anything or correcting assumptions, it was about me. That was Tate's line. You could whisper, speculate, joke, but the moment it touched me directly, he became violent in my defense. Fear left me then, replaced by something heavier and harder to carry. You would be so lucky to have the chance to spend one night in the bed of Noah Lunis, Tate yelled at the bully. Even during the AIDS crisis, when paranoia made people crueler and rumors deadlier, stories about us sharing a bedroom became fodder at the water fountain. People asked Tate again and again what we were, pushing for a confession or a denial that satisfied them. He always answered the same way, his voice flat and dangerous. We're buddies, say anything different and I'll rearrange your face. It shut people up fast. Tate didn't care about rumors unless they were true, and in his mind they weren't. Tate was a homophobe. And that truth lived beside all the others. He hated the idea of two men loving each other romantically, and he hated even more the thought that anyone believed that about us. But none of that stopped him from sharing a bed with me, touching me platonically, or defending me with his fists and his threats. Loving him meant holding all of those contradictions at once, knowing he would protect me from the world without ever being able to love me the way I loved him. And no one ever understood that, not really. At 17, I read romantic novels like their survival guides. I underlined passages. I reread Confessions. I cling to the idea that love can arrive late, that it can change shape, that one day Tate might look at me and really see me, not just as his best friend, not just as something safe and familiar, but as someone he wants. We held hands even in public, and I knew exactly what that gave them: ammunition. Bullies, jocks, kids who lived for cruelty latched onto it like proof that I deserved what they did to me. Every time our fingers laced together in a hallway or across the quad, I felt the stares sharpen. I was already a target, but that simple act made me visible in a way that felt dangerous. I was scared of it sometimes, scared of what it invited, but Tate never let go. Tate liked me openly, stubbornly, and he never hid his physical affection. He touched me the way someone touches what belongs to them, not possessive, just cert. A hand on my back, fingers brushing mine, his shoulder pressed against me when we stood together. To him it was normal, to everyone else it was unacceptable. Teachers shifted uncomfortably, cleared their throats, and watched us too long. You could see it on their faces, boys just didn't act like that. They didn't know what rule we were breaking, only that we were breaking one. I felt their discomfort like a second skin, but Tate didn't. If anything, it made him firmer, more deliberate. He refused to shrink us down into something quieter or more palatable. He wouldn't perform fear just to make other people comfortable. And even though those public moments made my life harder, made the bullying worse, they also gave me something I couldn't survive without: proof that he wasn't ashamed of me, not even for a second. That was the contradiction of Tate. He was a homophobe, yes, rigid and unyielding in what he believed men should and shouldn't be. But his care for me existed outside of those beliefs, stronger than them. He didn't see handholding as a statement or a confession or a rebellion. He saw it as me needing him and him being there. The world read it as something else entirely, so no one understood us. Not the kids who hurt me, not the teachers who looked away, not the adults who whispered. They saw the surface and invented a story that fit their fears. What they never saw was the truth, that Tate's hand in mine wasn't about defiance or romance, it was about safety. And I was willing to endure anything, any name, any bruise, just to keep holding on. We'd wrestle during lunch in the back of the school, just the two of us, laughing and roughhousing as we had done for years. It wasn't serious, just a game, a way to release energy, a way to be close without anyone else understanding it. But one day a teacher caught us mid-tumble and immediately called our parents. The way they looked at us, two seniors rolling on the ground, arms tangled, laughter spilling over, made it clear we'd made everyone uncomfortable. Adults and students alike couldn't figure out what they were seeing, and that only added fuel to the gossip. Tate didn't hesitate though. Even when the teacher scolded us, even when the call was made, he kept his calm. He never apologized for the closeness between us, never acted embarrassed. He just shrugged like it was natural to me, natural to him, natural to exist this way, no matter how wrong everyone else thought it was. That defiance, subtle but absolute, made me feel protected and understood in a world that never made sense. Even after that, people whispered, stifled laughs, and stared. They didn't know what to call what we had, so they labeled it discomfort, scandal, or worse. But for Tate and me it was just the same, just another ordinary day being together, another ordinary moment we refused to shrink. And I clung to that normalcy, even as the rest of the school tried to turn it into something dangerous. Tate smiled like he knew an inside joke about our relationship and closeness that no one knew but him. He never told me why he couldn't stop smirking around other people who hated his PDA or closeness to me. Fucking blind idiots and fucking useless people, all of them. Tate would call those individuals who dared whisper about two straight boys' platonic bond that hurt no one. Tate's courage in public, the way he stood by me and the way he refused to let social norms dictate our behavior became the invisible shield I carried with me. Every time we wrestled, held hands, or simply touched, he made it clear, what we had wasn't for anyone else to define. No teacher, no peer, no adult could undo the safety he gave me. Nothing and no one would Tate choose over me for any reason. Tate was always the vocal one, the demonstrating member of our relationship about his feelings, and he never cared who heard him. He whispered "I love you" to me in class just low enough for me to hear, or said it softly in the hallways as we passed between crowds. No matter the volume, I felt it like a pulse, steady and unshakable. I, on the other hand, kept my love hidden, buried deep where no one could see it. But hearing him speak it, whether in class or in the hallways, made it impossible not to feel it too. He didn't just speak his feelings, he defended them fiercely. Any teacher who tried to tell him to stop acting weird quickly learned that Tate had no filter. He'd snap back telling them to fuck off, and he didn't care about the consequences. Detention, calls to parents, lectures, it didn't matter. To him, those words and rules were meaningless if they got in the way of showing care, protecting me, or being himself. Even when trouble followed him, I couldn't help but admire him. He made a statement with every look, every touch, every word he whispered in private. While I shrank into silence and secrecy, Tate declared our bond for the world to see, daring anyone to challenge it. And yet it was never about rebellion, it was about truth. His love, his loyalty, and his openness were unapologetic, and that gave me courage I didn't know I had. The teachers who frowned, the students who whispered, the ones who pointed fingers, they couldn't make him smaller and they couldn't touch what we had. Tate made it clear that our bond wasn't something to be hidden or softened. It existed boldly in every word and gesture, immune to the judgment of others. And that was the core of it, Tate's fearlessness, his stubborn openness, and his refusal to apologize for who he was or how he felt. No one ever understood the depth of what we shared, and maybe that was fine. Because as long as he was whispering "I love you" in class, saying it low in the hallways, or holding my hand without flinching, I knew that no whisper, rumor, or punishment could ever change it. And that was the cruel irony of our life together. Everyone saw something odd, something wrong, something to gossip about. But no one ever understood the truth, that our closeness was never about rebellion or romance, but about loyalty, protection, and a bond stronger than the whispers and stares that surrounded us. We met when we were 4 years old. It was 1972, and I was sitting alone in a preschool classroom, my feet not quite touching the floor. My mom had dropped me off without a backward glance. I suspected even then that she had never wanted me, not the way other mothers wanted their kids. My dad had died only months before, and she was drowning in grief. I was just there, quiet, small, easy to forget. I didn't cry, I never did. I learned early that crying didn't bring anyone back. I was an introvert before I knew the word for it. Quiet, invisible, the kind of kid teachers forgot to call on and classmates forgot to invite. I was eating my lunch alone when I noticed him. 2 tables to my right sat a boy I'd never seen before, dark hair, sharp hazel eyes. He was eating a small sandwich, legs swinging beneath the chair like he didn't quite fit yet. He looked up and caught me staring. Instead of looking away, he stood up. He walked over and stopped in front of me, holding out his hand as he'd practiced it. He was munching on apples smeared in cinnamon as he offered me one. "Hi," he said, shaking my hand awkwardly. "I'm Tate." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know why he was talking to me, but I let him sit next to me anyway. We ate in silence. I didn't ask where he came from or why he chose me. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted. I just knew that for the first time since my dad died, I wasn't alone at the table. That was how it started. 2 quiet boys, 1 empty space filled without explanation. 13 years later, I'm still sitting next to him, still quiet, still hopping, still loving him in ways he never meant to inspire. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all, not that he doesn't love me, but he never had to try. Why did I fall for Tate? I've asked myself that question more times than I can count, usually late at night when I can't sleep and the answer feels just out of reach. If I'm honest, I think it started with his lips. That sounds shallow, I know, but it's the truth. I couldn't stop staring at them even when we were kids, soft, expressive, always doing something interesting. Smiling when he was amused, pressing together when he was thinking, twisting slightly when he was annoyed. They felt like they belonged to someone who knew how to comfort people without trying. Then there was his hair, curly, kinky, black as night. It never sat the way other people's hair did. It had a mind of its own, just like him. Tate hated anyone touching it. He jerked away, then snapped at kids, saying "fuck off, cunt" to anyone who reached without asking.